Your violin playing suffers because you're trying too hard and doing too much. Let me explain. I'm Tobias Murphy, and this is Murphy Music Academy. And of course, if you need help simplifying your own playing, then that just means that you need to shoot an email to admin@murphymusicacademy.org to set up a trial lesson with one of our excellent violin, viola, or piano teachers. Now, if I were to ask you who are the greatest violinists that ever lived, I'd probably get something like Jascha Heifetz, or David Oistrakh, or maybe even some living players like Itzhak Perlman or Hilary Hahn. And for those of you who like Hilary Hahn just a little too much, and also for those of you who like leaving comments like, "I can't believe you think Hilary Hahn's a good violinist," please just leave those comments in the video. Just don't even finish watching it. Put them down there right now. Get into a 50-comment fight immediately, because it actually helps the video out a lot. But back to the subject matter at hand. What links all of those incredibly different but incredibly great fiddle players together is that their playing is much simpler than yours. Now, what do I mean by this? After all, it's been pretty well established by no greater an authority than Watch Mojo.
Number 1. Violin.
That the violin is one of the most difficult instruments to play. After all, it takes a long time to go from this to this. So how can good, let alone great violin playing be simple? Well, first off, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. And if you're wondering how that makes any sense at all, well, you're just going to have to watch to the end of this video. But let's start with those great masters. How is their playing simple? Well, for starters, usually the path they take to accomplish any given technique is the most efficient motion possible. And we'll start with the greatest of all, Jascha Heifetz. And so what I think you'll find after watching that is that the thing that links all of these incredibly diverse players together is that their motions are as simple and efficient as they can make them. Okay, well enough, so how do we apply this to our own playing? Well, there are 3 major aspects of violin playing that I want to cover in this regard. Basics, really. The bow arm, the left hand, and musicality. Because yes, the best musicality is also simple. So let's start with bow technique. Hopefully your bow technique has at least marginally improved since you first started playing violin, and if it has, then that means it has actually gotten simpler than when you first started. For instance, let's take a look at the bow hold. A proper bow hold should mimic the relaxed state of the hand, like this. A bad bow hold, as we often see in many students, is a mangled mess. Now, I don't think you should tell me that I'm doing more to hold up the bow by doing this than this. There's way more effort that is going into this, and it's detrimental to my playing. Moving on, let's talk about the basic bow motion. To create a decent sound on the violin, all you need to do is take the bow by itself, put it on the strings, just the weight of the bow, and then open and close the elbow joint. But what do most beginners do? They take the bow, and then they use their big muscles, the muscles in the upper arm and in the shoulder, to move the bow like that. Tell me which one is simpler and which one takes more effort. So if you've improved your bow technique in any way, I guarantee you it's gotten simpler. But what if we do want to add pressure to the strings? After all, we can't play with only the weight of the bow. And yes, pressure, not weight. The concept of arm weight is entirely misunderstood, and it's something I am going to make a video about, but until then, you put pressure onto the bow. You do not rest your arm into the string. I'm sorry, I know I had teachers that taught me that. Very good teachers. That's not how it works. I will show you a better way in the near future, so right now might be a good time to subscribe. Anyway, back to pressure. If you use the big muscles in the arm, like many students do, to press the bow into the strings in an effort to get more sound, not only is this a waste of precious energy, but you're also not going to get a very good or consistent sound. But instead, if you use this rotation motion in the forearm, which is technically called pronation, and you use that motion to push the string down, not only is this going to give you greater control over the sound, but this is not going to interfere with the most basic back and forth motion of bow technique. But what about more advanced bow technique, like spiccato? Certainly that has to be a lot more complicated, right? No, not at all. So spiccato is actually a combination of this forearm rotation motion and opening of the arm, right? So what the forearm rotation does, we're not actually pushing the bow into the string, but we're using this to throw the bow at the string, right? So the throwing motion should not come from your upper arm, just like the pressure motion shouldn't. You can entirely get the bounce, the throw motion from here. Now that, of course, doesn't actually make any sound, so we still need the basic back and forth motion of the elbow to make sound, because it's only rubbing the strings horizontally that makes sound on the violin. So it's just these two motions have to be combined. So I have to find a way to combine this and this. That's it. That's literally all spiccato is. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you're doing it right, it is pretty simple. Enough of the bow. Let's go to the left hand now. If you look at the left hands of some of the violinists we mentioned earlier in this video, their hand stays roughly in the same shape no matter what. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, whether the hand is down here or up here, the hand shape is remarkably consistent. But what about your playing? As a teacher, I can't tell you just how much time I've spent trying to simplify my students' left-hand motions. Whether their fingers are lifted too high and splayed out like this, or they're squeezing the string much harder than necessary, or they've got this weird claw hand where half the fingers are curved inward, and many, many, many other things that all get in the way of maintaining a nice, simple, consistent hand shape, which, much like the proper bow hold, should mimic the natural, relaxed shape of the hand. And what about intonation? Of the things that are so often cited as being why violin is so difficult, intonation is usually at the top of everyone's list. But strip everything else away, and intonation really comes down to three things. You're either flat, sharp, or in tune. But let's be honest, you're probably flat or sharp. And as far as the physical aspects of why you're flat or sharp while playing the violin, it also comes down to three possibilities. Either your hand is not in the right place on the fingerboard, or your fingers are too far apart from each other, or they're too close together. And that's it. All things being equal, assuming that you aren't doing something really dumb with your left hand, those are the basic three reasons why we play out of tune. That's it. That's all it is. And I've found that learning to approach intonation in this manner, setting up the hand properly and then adjusting the width of the fingers accordingly, is a much more effective way to develop more consistent intonation than trying to meticulously aim every single finger. So if violin playing is so simple, then why is it so difficult? Well, frankly, most of us are just not that naturally good at simplistic, efficient motion. While the human brain and body are capable of incredible things, violin playing I think chief among them, it wasn't exactly built for this. Your brain doesn't automatically know that it needs to move the violin bow in a specific way in order to create a beautiful sound. All your brain knows is that you're trying to move a big stick, and why not just utilize these very easily accessible big muscles right here, and that will move the big stick just fine. And so when we practice, we're essentially trying to rewire our brain so that instead of activating these muscles automatically, it activates the ones that actually create the simple, efficient, beautiful motion. And this brain rewiring, this finding new mind-muscle connections, takes a lot of time and mental effort. And you basically have to learn to do this rewiring process for just about everything in violin technique. But I think at the end of the day, understanding the simplistic nature of violin technique is going to be incredibly helpful to your practicing. Why am I having trouble with this particular violin technique? Well, maybe I haven't practiced it enough, or maybe my conception of it is just way too complicated. For an example from my own practice, when I play, I barely press down the strings at all with my left hand. Because one day I realized that what was making a good, clear sound as far as my left hand is concerned had nothing to do with the amount of pressure I was putting on the strings. Rather, it's the stability in the fingertip. And I actually made a whole video about this, and you should definitely go watch that after this one. So I discovered that if you can learn to stabilize your fingertip, right? Because a lot of the times when people push down the strings, the finger's actually moving around a lot, even though they don't realize it. They think they're just holding the string down. But if you listen very closely, you'll hear the note kind of going sharp and flat and all over the place, not staying right in the center. And this is why people like to squeeze a lot, because that does mitigate some of that. But if you learn to stabilize your fingertip without jamming the finger into the string, so that when you touch the string, the finger just stays there, then you've simplified the motion of the left-hand fingers to a remarkable degree, and you aren't using up any extra energy into the finger motion by squeezing. Now, my playing has benefited immensely from discovering this, but it took me a long time to essentially convince my fingers that this was the correct way to go. But now I have a much more simple and efficient motion to my fingers. Lastly, I want to talk about how simplicity should affect your playing in the musical approach. Let's compare two different recordings of the Brahms Violin Concerto. One being by my favorite living violinist, Augustin Hadelich, and one being a very good student recording that I just found on YouTube. Now, these two recordings have very similar tempi, so I think it's a good comparison. First, let's listen to the student recording. Now, she's very good, but the recording, for me, comes off not as musically interesting because there are too many events in her phrasing, right? Every note feels like it's an event rather than every phrase feeling like it's an event. But listen to Hadelich. Not only does each phrase feel like its own event, but the endings of each phrase naturally point to the next phrase, so a single thread runs through the entire opening of the concerto. And if you listen to some older recordings, like this recording of Sharing, I I think he does an even better job of creating fewer events in the music, therefore creating a more cohesive musical line. So even in the realm of musicality, it's this sense of simplicity that takes the music from sounding like a student performance, albeit a very good one, to a good or even great interpretation. So how does this apply to you? Well, the first thing you can do is make sure you are working with a quality private instructor. It doesn't have to be somebody from Murphy Music Academy. Obviously, there are plenty of great teachers out there, but you need to be working with someone. Having someone who consistently assesses your own playing through a very critical and knowledgeable eye will inevitably help you get rid of any of the junk that's mucking up your playing. And when you're practicing throughout the week, always ask yourself, how can I make this more simple and efficient and still have it sound good? And thirdly, listen to and watch a lot of great violin playing. Now, I'm not saying to copy anyone, because a lot of great violinists have some interesting technical idiosyncrasies that work for them, but probably won't work for you. James Ennis' thumb is a pretty good example. But just absorbing a lot of great violin playing will bend your ear and mind towards the right way to hear and think about violin playing and interpretations. As I've said many times in this video, playing simply is not easy. Just like refining gold, it takes a lot of energy and time to strip away all of the nonsense and dross from your playing. But if you really love playing this instrument, it's definitely worth it. I've been Tobias Murphy for Murphy Music Academy, always here to remind you there is no pleasure in mediocrity. Happy practicing, and I'll see you next time.